El Mencho, the most powerful cartel leader in Mexico, was found hiding in the quiet mountains of Jalisco, laying low inside a cluster of cabins in a town called Tapalpa, covered by pine trees, mist hanging over the hills, and as usual, surrounded by an army of loyal bodyguards. For years, he had moved like a shadow, untouchable, unbreakable, but that morning, the mountain shook. The pine trees shattered into chaos, because within hours, his location was exposed by American intelligence. Those same bodyguards who stood between El Mencho and the world would go on to stir chaos across western Mexico. 85 roadblocks, burning vehicles, highways shut down, cities paralyzed, American tourists trapped between fire and armed men. This is not a story about the end of a cartel. This is the story of the morning that changed everything, and why the aftermath proved that killing the man may have been a mistake. You need to understand one thing before we get to that mountain. This man had been running and winning for over a decade. The DEA wanted him. The US Treasury had sanctioned him. Interpol had flagged him. Mexico's military had hunted him across Jalisco, Michoacán, and Colima. The United States placed a $10 million bounty on his head, then raised it again. He survived US federal indictments, survived assassination attempts from rival cartels, survived drone surveillance programs that tracked movement patterns across entire mountain ranges, survived internal betrayals, the kind that got other cartel leaders caught and caged. Every single time authorities closed in, he disappeared. And this wasn't luck. This was architecture. El Mencho didn't just move between safe houses. He built loyalty networks into entire towns, communities in the mountains of Jalisco and Michoacán, where locals worked as lookouts without ever being formally recruited. Because the alternative was worse. Strangers were flagged the moment they arrived. License plates were noted. Anything unusual, a vehicle parked too long, a face that didn't belong, moved up the chain within minutes. His communication protocols changed constantly. Encrypted bursts, short in duration, irregular in timing. He rotated personnel to prevent any single person knowing too much. Vehicles moved only at night. Supply deliveries ran on tight intervals specifically designed to defeat pattern recognition. He understood surveillance doctrine, because he'd watched what happened to the men who didn't. Most cartel leaders hide in cities, in plain sight, surrounded by civilian density. El Mencho did the opposite. He chose the mountains, pine forest, uneven ground, limited road access, terrain that requires local knowledge to navigate at speed, knowledge that his people had, and any raiding force wouldn't. A defender on that ground, who knows every trail and every ridgeline, can hold off a force 3 times his size, and he had more than that. When authorities finally breached his compound in Tapalpa, they found rocket launchers, mortar shells, the kind of hardware that doesn't belong to a man who's hiding. It belongs to a man who's daring you to find him. There was a moment, in 2015, when Mexico got its clearest signal of what it was dealing with. A military convoy hunting CJNG operatives in Jalisco was ambushed. In the firefight, cartel gunmen used a rocket-propelled grenade to shoot down a military helicopter. 15 soldiers were killed. The CJNG didn't run from that attack. They claimed it, because the message wasn't just to the soldiers, it was to every government official watching. We know you're hunting us, and we have the firepower to hunt you back. After that, El Mencho became Mexico's #1 national security priority and went even deeper underground. By early 2026, something had quietly changed. Not a single dramatic development, not one tip that cracked everything open, a shift in pressure, a convergence of several small things that, together, meant the net was finally tightening. The US Treasury had expanded sanctions against CJNG-linked financial networks, not just targeting cartel members directly, but the businesses, family connections, and front companies used to move money. Every tightening of that financial grip forced adaptation, and adaptation at scale creates patterns. Inside Mexico, military intelligence units that had historically been compromised by cartel infiltration were quietly rotated out. New command protocols were put in place. Information was being siloed more tightly than at any point in recent memory. Somewhere in the mountains near the town of Tapalpa, Jalisco, a small, unremarkable colonial town that most people outside Mexico have never heard of, encrypted communications started pinging, short bursts, irregular timing, but always near the same coordinates. Satellite imagery was pulled and analyzed, vehicles moving near a cluster of cabins, but only at night, supplies arriving in intervals tight enough to suggest a strict operational schedule rather than ordinary civilian life, lookout positions along the forest roads. Then, thermal imaging confirmed it. More than a dozen armed guards, one structure unusually reinforced, heat signatures that didn't match anything in that area except one thing, a high-value target with a protection detail. Military intelligence believed they had something, not a rumor, not a tip from an informant who might be feeding disinformation, a pattern. And patterns don't lie. They didn't announce it, didn't brief additional agencies, didn't create paper trails that could leak through the wrong hands. They built the perimeter first, over days, quietly positioning units along the access roads, mapping the tree lines, identifying the breakout routes El Mencho's team would try to use if the compound was breached. When they moved, they were going to close every door at once. No leaks, no warnings, no second chances. Before sunrise, Special Forces units moved into final positions. Helicopters flew low, below the ridge lines, to reduce acoustic warning time and stay out of any radar footprint. Ground convoys used dirt access roads that wouldn't appear on standard navigation maps. No headlights, radio silence. At 5:12 a.m., the perimeter closed. Then, the first exchange. Gunfire erupted from inside the cabin complex. The bodyguards inside were trained. They had rehearsed this. Windows and tree line positions, covering angles that forced any assault team to take fire from multiple directions simultaneously. These weren't panicked defenders. They were executing a plan. Military units returned fire in disciplined bursts. Controlled, professional. This wasn't chaos. This was two prepared forces meeting each other in the dark on a mountain neither of them would forget. At some point during the engagement, pressure inside the compound reached a breaking point. A breakout was attempted. Several armed men fled toward the forest line, the same tree line routes the military had mapped during its days of quiet preparation. Among them, sources indicated, was El Mencho himself, possibly already wounded, moving through smoke and debris toward the trees. The gunfight intensified at the perimeter. Explosions inside the structure, the kind of destruction that happens when a heavily armed compound is being torn apart from the outside. He was hit, whether from direct gunfire or fragmentation. The reporting doesn't confirm which, but the injury was severe. Internal bleeding, critical trauma. A helicopter evacuation was initiated. The mountain terrain made road extraction impossible at that speed. In those conditions, he was airlifted under fire, but the damage was already done. He did not survive the transport. After more than a decade as one of the world's most hunted men, the man who had outrun every indictment, every bounty, every drone, every raid, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, died in the air, over the mountains of Jalisco. Not in a cell, not in a courtroom, not with his hands raised, still running. The news moved through CJNG networks before the government had issued a single official word, and Western Mexico answered, not with grief, with fire. Within hours of El Mencho's death, highways across Jalisco were blocked with burning vehicles, buses, trucks, private cars, dragged into position and set alight to form walls of flame across the road surface. Gas stations were torched. Armed men pulled civilians out of their cars and sent them running. Businesses were set ablaze. Schools closed. In Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, public transit stopped completely. By the end of the first day, authorities had recorded 85 cartel-linked roadblocks across multiple states, coordinated, simultaneous. Not the work of a scattered organization in panic, the work of an organization executing a contingency that had already been planned. In Puerto Vallarta, a tour shuttle heading toward the port rolled around a bend and stopped dead. A bus was parked sideways across the road. People were running away from it. A man with a gun appeared from the far side and motioned, "Turn around." They did, and found a burning vehicle blocking the only way back. Trapped between an armed man and a wall of fire, They did the only thing they could. A local told them to get to the beach. They took a tender out to their snorkeling boat and sat offshore, watching smoke rise over the town they had come to for a holiday. Elsewhere, hundreds of other tourists were making the same desperate calculations. Which road is clear? Are the airports open? Can I get to my hotel? Major airlines moved fast. Air Canada, United, American, Aeromexico. One by one, flights into Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara were suspended, and more than 1,000 people found themselves stranded overnight inside the Guadalajara Zoo, sleeping on buses in the parking lot because the roads between them and their hotels were no longer safe. The U.S. State Department's 24-hour emergency crisis line was flooded with hundreds of calls from Americans trying to find any way out. And then the second wave hit. Online. A video spread across social media claiming that an aircraft had been set on fire at Guadalajara's international airport, shared tens of thousands of times, screenshots circulating on WhatsApp groups used by tourists trying to coordinate escapes. It was false. Reuters fact-check confirmed with aviation and airport authorities that no such incident occurred, but it spread for hours before corrections caught up. And by then, it didn't matter, because the people who saw it were already making decisions based on it. Staying put, avoiding the airport, calling the State Department at 3 in the morning. The cartel didn't need to burn the airport, they just needed people to believe they had. None of this was random. None of this was grief. Burning buses on highways are not acts of rage. They are coordinated signals. They paralyze government movement. They generate international headlines. They prove to every rival cartel watching from the outside that the CJNG's operational capacity is intact. The message to the Mexican government was short and unmistakable. You killed the man. The machine is still here.